Okay, we just mentioned some of the things that are not mediatable. We mentioned alcohol and drug abuse, spousal abuse, and so forth. It even goes beyond the fact that some of these things are not mediatable. Some of these things you are required by Texas statute and by many other states have similar statutes that when you feel, now once again this is a you feel kind of thing, that this is actually taking place, you are required by law to report them. The three categories in Texas that you must report are child abuse, elderly abuse, and stalking. Okay? Now, let's talk about stalking first because that'll be the most easiest not to define. First of all, the statute is very loosely worded about what actually constitutes stalking. Well, it's one of those things where a judge was asked that one time, much like one of the Supreme Court justices that was asked to define what pornography is. Well, I can't really define it, but I know it when I see it. Well, it's much like this. For example, does stalking constitute if you call someone 3 times? Maybe not. 10 times? Don't know. 20 times? Possibly. Is it if they leave 10 notes? 30 notes? 40 notes? I mean, there is no quantifiable number of contacts that you can look in the statutes and say this is stalking. It depends on what's in the notes. It depends on what's in the messages. It depends on how the other person is perceiving these contacts. If that person feels like they're being stalked and harassed and intimidated, then you need to consider it. You need to consider it as being stalking. Now, that's one of the most difficult things to define is stalking because there's no clear indicator. Elderly abuse and spousal abuse, once again, you have a responsibility to report these. Well, first of all, who are you going to report them to? If you have a clear indication that not spousal abuse, elderly abuse, somehow spousal abuse is not included, so I guess that's okay. I haven't reported my wife yet, so. For example, let's talk about child abuse. Especially if you're doing family cases, modification cases, divorce cases, you know, one parent's always going to accuse the other parent of some type of neglect or abuse. Okay, like little Johnny went home with his dad for the weekend. He came back with bruises on his legs. Okay, well, you know, little Johnny's a 9-year-old boy who climbs trees and rocks and climbs up riverbeds and stuff. And, you know, we've raised 4 children in our household, and, you know, lots of times, you know, the kids get bruises, you know, because they're active. And so just because a child has bruises doesn't mean an abuse is taking place. Remember, parents typically always try to use their kids against each other. So if that question comes up, then you certainly need to explore it. You need to ask questions like, well, how big were the bruises? Have they ever been bruises there before? Has he ever received bruises playing around your house? You know, you question it. And in all of I've done 250 or 60 divorce cases. In all of those cases, on only one time have I ever had to report child abuse. And it was one of those situations where in the opening statement, the lady said, well, he's been abusing our child for a long time, and here's Polaroid pictures of the cigarette burns that he has done to this child. Okay, so when that happens, what you do is you immediately stop the mediation. You say, well, from the rules of mediation, we have to stop the mediation session, and I have to call and report this. Okay, so you've ended the mediation session. And if one of the parties or both the parties want to get up and leave, let them leave. Okay? You know where they live, you know, and hopefully their check's already cleared. So who do you call? Don't call Child Protective Services. Don't call Health and Human Services, you call the police. You call the police because they deal with this stuff every single day. And you let the police decide where this needs to go, okay? First of all, if you've got somebody who is abusing people, then abusing a child it doesn't take much of a step to start abusing other people. They probably have anyway. So what I did was I simply stepped out the door, picked up my cell phone, I dialed emergency, and I told them that I need a police officer here because I have evidence of child abuse. Now, it didn't take, you would think it would have taken a long time. It didn't seem like it took 2 minutes, and they were there. Neither party left. They were still sitting there. And in my mind, I thought they were just going to ask her questions about the pictures and arrest him, okay? The officers came in. I talked to him for about 2 seconds. I told him what had happened. They asked him, and the man, they stood him up, read him his rights, handcuffed him. And then they asked her, they said, well, when did you take these pictures? And she said, 2 weekends ago. And they asked her one question, did you report this? And she said no, and it was clear she was saving these pictures to use against her husband in the mediation session. And so they asked her to stand up. They read her rights, handcuffed her, and took her out because she had not reported it. Okay, so they arrested both of them. And it didn't even occur to me that she had violated the law, but clearly the officers knew that she had. Okay, so don't try to guess around to who to call. Just call the police. The police will know where to direct this to. Yes, sir.
In the instances where you didn't have the evidence of a photograph, did you caucus and to discuss it with the person who was saying that might have been occurring, or go kind of just do something separately so you didn't create more conflict?
I could have, but I never even. It's one of those things where people accuse people of stuff all the time, and it's just. I mean, looking at their expression, looking at their body language and how they're saying it, if it had ever risen to the level that I thought that, well, you know, I need to explore this separately as opposed to in the open session, then yes, absolutely, you could have called a caucus and done that. But, you know, with this, she had the pictures, she threw them out there. It was very clear. I mean, it didn't have anything to do with the gut feeling. Boom, there was the evidence. And you don't even hesitate. You end the mediation, and you immediately report it to the authorities. And the authorities are, you call the police. Because I get this all the time where people say, well, gosh, I don't know who to call. Do I call Child Protective? And if I'm doing a mediation at night, there's nobody over at CPS to call. If I'm doing it on the weekend, there's no government official to call or no. I said, the police are there 24 hours, 24/7. So call the police. Byron, would you agree with that?
Yes, sir. But you can call a 1-800 number for Child Protective Services down in Austin. Basically, they'll generate a report, and they'll notify the police as well. So that would cover that falls under the counselors. They make the duty notification. They can notify us or CPS, because we'll in turn are going to notify CPS. But yes, sir, that's correct. You can always get a hold of police.
Well, remember, and that's good advice. Thanks for sharing that with us, Byron. And I would guess most states have a 1-800 hotline for child protection?
And it's also online.
Online, okay.
The 1-800 number, you'll generate a CPS report, and they'll notify the local police agency, because you may be in a jurisdiction that these folks don't live in. So if we come out, we can't arrest them if it happened in Amarillo. So it'd be a lot of correspondence, a lot of investigation. So the main thing is notify local police agency or Child Protective Services, and we will get it.
And my advice is you just call the local police, and let them establish jurisdiction. Let them worry about that. You've done your duty once you've reported it, okay? And if there's other people that need to be reported, they'll take care of that. Yes?
And it has to be reported within 24 hours, right?
It's supposed to be reported as soon as possible. And so that's why I say you stop the mediation session and you report it immediately, okay? And you know for sure you can get the police department. Now, they may not respond, but I was impressed at how quickly they got there.
But if you're in doubt about, bruises and things, just like in your example, you can be held liable for that. So if you're in doubt, you need to.
Well, if you have a gut feeling, if in your gut it tells you that abuse is taking place, report it. You have a responsibility to report it. Now, people talking about bruises, there's been almost the majority of the divorce mediations where the parents use the kids against each other. You know, they talk about that. As a matter of fact, I did a mediation where this was to modify a divorce decree. It was to modify an agreement where the husband had been a camper and a fisherman all of his life, and when they were married, every weekend he took their son with him camping and fishing. The wife hated the outdoors. Okay, the wife, roughing it for her was, you had to change out the batteries on the remote control. That would be, didn't do anything outdoors, didn't take part in the camping trips or the fishing trips. So they ended up getting a divorce, and I think the son was about 6 or 7 years old, and it was on and this was every weekend that the father had the son. They're either camping or fishing or hunting, okay, and so they're on a fishing trip, and the son gets bitten by a water moccasin. And the father treats him there, rushes him to the hospital, and then when he's taking care of at the hospital and everything, and then calls his wife, lets his wife know, everything's okay, I'm here, we've got him at the hospital, and she says that, and in the mediation, because what she wanted to do was to make all the visitation now supervised at her house, so that he could no longer take his son camping and fishing and all the things that they had been doing. And she said that the father was negligent by allowing that water moccasin to bite her son. Okay, and so what we had to do was and she accused the father of child abuse by neglect, by allowing him to be close enough to the water, although that child had been close enough to the water 1,000 times to be bitten by a water moccasin. And so we talked through this, and we talked about, well, what is it that the son likes to do, and how long has the father been fishing and hunting and taking the son, and so we went through this whole history, and the wife ended up talking about that, that the son actually loved, couldn't wait for the dad's weekend so that he could go and be with dad to do whatever it was that they were doing out in the woods. And so, it was one of those things, and then we talked about, we got her to admit that, yes, no, it wasn't abuse, no, it wasn't neglect, that, it could have happened at any time. But that took almost 3 hours to get her to that point, because she was so adamant of the fact that her husband was putting her son in harm's way, basically. And so, and the way we got her to think about it in another way was to talk about, let's say, and using this example, let's say that you get the supervised visitation and it's only at your house. How's that going to make your son feel? Okay? Because she was only looking at it from her perspective. She wasn't looking at it and from her position as the mother. She wasn't thinking about the interest of her child. Okay? And she thought about it, and she said, well, he would be very disappointed. And I said, well, how disappointed would he be? And she said, well, he would be heartbroken. And so I said, then how can we avoid that? Okay, and so she admitted. But they both had lawyers, and they probably spent, $3,000 or $4,000 just to get that one part dealt with. Yes?
What if you miss it? What if it's actual neglect? Would that come back as a legal issue for you? Could they hold you responsible?
No, because you have to believe that something's taken place. And just because somebody says, you still have to believe it. I mean, you have to have a gut feeling. I mean, just because somebody says that little Johnny's being abused, okay, I mean, you certainly need to explore it a little bit more, and you can tell by reading people. I don't think I've ever missed it. Certainly I might have, but Now, if you don't explore it, if you don't ask more questions about it, you know, to be able to justify that you don't think that anything really happened, then I think you might have some issues. But, I mean, there is a lot of child abuse that goes on out there, and a lot of it that goes unreported. But remember, many times the parents are thinking about themselves, not their children, when they're making these accusations. Okay, so you can explore them, and if need be, as was suggested up here, is you could take the people into caucus to explore and ask more direct and pointed questions. On elderly abuse, it would be the same thing. Elderly abuse is going to be one of those things where it might even be more of a neglect issue as it is a physically abusive issue. I have a couple of mediator colleagues of mine who have actually reported a couple of instances of elderly abuse. I've never run into it myself. Of course, I've accused my children of that all the time towards me. But okay, so any questions about the things that you have to report? Now, let's say that in the mediation session somebody says, well, you know, it's the first time I've seen him straight because, you know, he's got a marijuana crop in his backyard. Now, is raising a marijuana crop in your backyard illegal? Officer?
Yes.
Yes, it is illegal. Okay. Do you report that? No, you do not report that. Okay?
Because it might be for medical purposes.
Because it might be for medical purposes, medicinal purposes. I don't think we have that passed in Texas, and I'm not sure what states have that passed. But anyway, no, you don't. Now, what if, though, somebody says, well, when I leave this mediation, I'm going to kill your new boyfriend? What do you do?
I would do it.
What would you do?
That's a tough one. It depends on how credible you think the people are, and if you truly believed it, I would. Err on the side of caution, you're protecting someone's life. You can articulate that to anybody. I truly believe he was serious, he was angry when he stormed out of here. You can articulate it, I would report it.
Okay, very, very good point. Yes, sir.
I don't care if you believe it's serious or not. I mean, you don't have to really believe it. If someone has a threat about the violent crime that's going to occur, it should be reported. I mean, if you think, oh, the guy's just shooting his mouth off, well, you still got offenses going to occur, like terroristic threat. If he makes a threat against somebody, it's not something you'd want to, whether it's mediation, confidentiality, it's not something you want to take a chance on unless somebody getting hurt. So I agree with Byron 100%.
Okay. Other thoughts?
We have a duty to warn, a legal duty to warn.
Okay, you're saying we have a legal duty to warn. Okay, what else? Other thoughts? Would you report it?
Me?
Yes, sir.
Oh, absolutely. Right or wrong, I probably would.
Okay. Well, and the answer to that is each one of you are going to have to make your own judgment call on that. You will be violating confidentiality, but if you think that someone's life is going to be in jeopardy and you can prevent that, you need to report it. Okay? You need to report it. And you need to have it on record that you've reported it. So once again, I call the police. Okay? So I've never had to do that yet. I know of other mediators that has fallen in their lap. You have a very hostile divorce case, and matter of fact, there's not a whole lot of them that aren't hostile, but you know, the one spouse, the former spouse is saying, well, you know, before the weekend's over, you know, I'm going to eliminate your boyfriend out there.
If the confidentiality issue is just a you know, some agreement that you've made with the party, why not include those in your limits of confidentiality? Just include it when you say, listen, everything we say in here is confidential except for. And as a professional, why don't why wouldn't you just include, if you tell me you're going to, first of all, you know, these 3 things that are mandated by law, but include the things that ethically you're comfortable with. If they don't agree to that, then there's probably an issue. But once they agree to the limits of confidentiality, whatever that might be for your practice, then there is no conflict with the confidentiality.
Okay, that's a good point. The problem that I have with that is that you can never list out all of the things that you might end up reporting. Once you start making a cafeteria list of things, and this is, when you start making a list of things that you are going to report them for, then now if you leave something off that list, then you're certainly misleading them. Anything that's going to jeopardize somebody's life, just do it. And once again, I don't include all of that. To me, that's the negative stuff. And it's going to be so rare that that happens anyway that, you know, I mean, you could make a confidentiality agreement 100 pages long and still not cover every single aspect, because there's going to be something that comes up that you haven't talked about, haven't covered yet. So, and what is the penalty in Texas or in most states for violating the confidentiality law? Sonny, what's the penalty?
Confidentiality of a mediation, it says that you can't use it at trial, you can't use it against somebody. I don't know of any affirmative penalty against someone. It's there, but there's no sanction that I'm aware of. Now, if you're an attorney and you break some confidentiality, or if it's a public record and you break some confidentiality, there's sanction. Well, not
right. And I'm not aware of any in any state, so other than, you know, people may not be able to trust you in those environments anymore, but still, I'm going to err on the side of caution. If I think somebody's life or other people's lives are in jeopardy, then I'm going to report it. Okay, Byron?
I think you brought up an interesting point yesterday where you talked about bringing your experience and your knowledge to it. Obviously, I feel I'm well versed in that area, and I'm real comfortable in what needs to be done or what I believe needs to be done. And that's kind of, I've been weighing what you were talking about as far as bringing my experience to the table. Because on something like that, it's real cut and dry to me on what needs to be done. So at that point, we could end the mediation and tell them, hey, we need to stop right here when we start getting threats and something we perceive as wrong, right?
Well, here's a mediation that this was an employment mediation that I did about 3 weeks ago, and we have a person who claims that they were wrongfully terminated, and there's about 8 people in the room, and this lady claims that she was wrongfully terminated, and also that she was sexually harassed. Okay. And the person that she filed the sexual harassment charges against was the person that refused to illegally punch her time card for her so that she wouldn't get fired for being late again. She had already been caught twice before having friends punch her time clock so that she wouldn't show that she came in late. And it's one of those places where, you know, they have time clocks all over this massive building, and so you don't really see who's punching the time clock, but a friend of hers, former friend now, who refused to break the company policy, break the law, and punch her time card for her so that it would show that she got there on time instead of being over an hour late again, because this would have been her 3rd offense and she would have been terminated, which she was terminated for being late. So she filed harassment charges against him, but her husband was there with her in this mediation, and her husband made this statement in the mediation. He says, well, you know, I always carry a knife, and if he had harassed my wife while I was there, I would have just slit his throat. And he did it very angrily. And so I said, well, there was also there was 3 attorneys in the room, and the sister who was a witness to the alleged sexual harassment, who was in there. She was acting as a translator. Why, I don't know. She spoke better English than I did. And so anyway, I said, okay, we need to stop the mediation for just a second. And I turned to and I said, sir, are you carrying a weapon on you right now? And he said, no, I only carry my knife when I'm at work. And it turns out he works in the same place that just in a different division, a different section than his wife did. And so I said, well, you know, you made this statement, and so, you know, and I had him stand up and empty his pockets because he was so forceful about that point, that you know, he said, I always carry my knife, and